Until I came to New Mexico, I never realized how much beauty water adds to a river. Mark Twain. On July 16, 1945, at 05:29 and 45 seconds, the first atomic bomb was detonated. It was said by people living in the area that it was the day the sun came up twice. The blast was felt at least 160 miles away, and the shockwave broke windows at a distance of 120 miles. This is the Long Journey Podcast with Jason Jamar, detailing my travels across America as I share thrilling stories from my 16-month backpacking trek from California to Maine and my 8-month kayak voyage from Maine to Texas. Day 53. Date, November 11th, 1999. Sunrise, 6:40 a.m. Sunset, 5:10 p.m. Moon phase, waxing crescent. Elevation, 7,400 feet. Location, Datil, New Mexico. After leaving Pie Town, I pushed eastward just south of the Sawtooth Mountains, which live up to their name. They are part of the Datil mountain range. I encountered another backpacker going west while I was headed east on Highway 60. He did not carry near the amount of gear that I did. I was excited to see someone else in the middle of nowhere. However, he did not respond to my gestures of greetings from afar. Something was off. My spidey sense said to be cautious. None of his body language or his mannerisms were welcoming. So we both stayed on our respective sides of the road, only pausing to exchange a few words and then on our separate ways. He had said his name was John from New Jersey and that this was his 5th time hitchhiking across the country. I wondered if he had heard the report of 2 separate escaped convicts traveling on foot in the area and was as suspicious of me as I was of him. It was an interesting encounter. I watched my 6, and within a few miles I made it to my next supply cache, waiting for me at the Eagle Guest Ranch in Datil, New Mexico. I was to get online, get cleaned up, and resupplied. Datil was named for the nearby mountains, which were in turn named by the Spanish. It is theorized that the local variety of yucca plants, fruit, resembled dates to the early explorers, hence the name. Descending out of Datil, there is a 400-foot drop in elevation to a large flat plain, the Plains of San Augustine. In the middle of this plain, 13 miles away, is the VLA, or Very Large Array, radio telescope. There are 27 separate radio telescopes aligned in the shape of a giant Y, each with a dish diameter of 82 feet. The 28th radio telescope is housed in a 10-story maintenance hangar and is swapped out with the other 27 for routine maintenance. This radio telescope array is used to look at our sun 93 million miles away and objects throughout our galaxy and the great vastness beyond. Walking down the hill towards them, still 10 miles away, I noticed them all facing to the east. A moment later, I looked up and they had changed direction to the south. After some time, I saw them change direction again. It was like watching a marching band make a to the rear in unison. Not far past here, I camped a night near Magdalena before making my way on to Socorro. The nights were starting to get very cold. My winter bag kept me toasty, but I soon realized that whatever water I wanted to drink the following morning needed to stay in my bag with me, or I would wake up to the water being frozen in my camelback. I met Louis Cerna while we both were passing through Socorro. Louis is a prolific author on New Mexico history, and a whole lot of fun to visit with. Him and his wife Gloria live in Albuquerque. Inscribed upon the cover of a book that he gave me, it perfectly summed up Louis. This is an opportunity to see our real Southwest history through the eyes of one who has climbed the hidden mountain, climbed down the face of the Acoma Cliff, and one who goes anywhere that history can be seen firsthand. I was not familiar with the references and I had to research them. The Acoma Cliff, the cliff-dwelling Acoma Pueblo within the Acoma Reservation. And according to tribal history, their people have lived there for over 2,000 years. The hidden mountain is a site for the Los Lunas Decalogue Stone, an inscription of the Ten Commandments in the Paleo-Hebrew script. It has a questionable history to its origins. I thanked Lewis and I continued down the trail. I traveled through San Antonio, New Mexico, where they filmed Young Guns, and crossed the Rio Grande. I then passed within 20 miles of the Trinity site, the site of the first atomic bomb test at White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico. On July 16, 1945 at 05:29 and 45 seconds, the first atomic bomb was detonated. It was said by people living in the area that it was the day the sun came up twice. The blast was felt at least 160 miles away, and the shockwave broke windows at a distance of 120 miles. Though the explanation given to the public at the time was that a munitions dump had exploded, the public suspected that something was aloof. It wasn't until after the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, Japan, on August 6, did the public find out what had happened in New Mexico. The atomic bomb and the test in New Mexico's White Sands were the fruits of the Manhattan Project, which started in June of 1942. The Manhattan Project became a race against time, for it was feared that the Germans were working on their own atomic bomb. The group constructing the bomb was led by Dr. J. Robert Oppenheimer, who is credited with being the driving force behind building a working prototype of an atomic bomb. Most of the construction of the bomb took place in Los Alamos, New Mexico, which I'm told was blacked out and no one knew of its existence until after the war. Afterward, you could look up on the mountain and see all kinds of light and evidence of the base's existence. Oppenheimer was said to have quoted a line of Vedic poetry from the Bhagavad Gita at the witness of the explosion, translated to, "I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." He had been initially relieved and thrilled by the test results, and had wished the bomb would have been ready sooner to use against Germany. However, he soon came to regret his contribution after the second bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. He told President Truman that the first bomb had been enough, and now felt he had blood on his hands. Truman was less than thrilled with Oppenheimer's assessment and had a few choice words on his maternal lineage. A few miles later, I crossed through the Valley of Fire, a Malpais lava flow about 4 to 6 miles wide, covering 125 square miles. Malpais is a Spanish word for Badlands. Then I was on my way up another mountain, the Capitan Mountains. I passed through Capitan and Lincoln, New Mexico. The Young Guns movies were based on the Lincoln County War and the life of Billy the Kid. Henry McCarty, also known as William H. Bonney, also known as Billy the Kid, made one of his many escapes from the jail there in Lincoln. He was, according to the official report of Pat Garrett, shot and killed on July 14, 1881 in Fort Sumner. Lincoln had a turbulent and violent past at one time. In 1999, it was just a small village town with no gas station, convenience stores, and only one public phone. I then made my way down the Hondo Valley and passed through Hondo, New Mexico, and then through Teeny. Teeny was tiny, and a series of other towns that just don't exist anymore. I also met another long-distance bicyclist, Greg Grimzik, was traveling from San Francisco, California to Austin, Texas. He planned to be in Georgetown, Texas for Thanksgiving, then return by plane to San Francisco. He stopped and talked for a while. He walked his bicycle along with me for a couple of miles, since we were both headed in the same direction. We shared excerpts from our many adventures and enjoyed the company. We couldn't help to notice all the traffic looking funny at us. We thought this must have been a sight to see. 2 cross-country travelers loaded with gear, miles from any town, out in the middle of the New Mexico plains. We exchanged contact info, wished each other well, and parted ways. Greg at a much faster clip. I made my way to Roswell. It was here that I met Otto and Dorothy Ekus, both retired teachers. Otto himself had served many years in the National Education Association. Now, I'm sure you all have heard and are associated Roswell, New Mexico, with an incident that occurred in 1947. I will not tarry long with that, for people all around the world know Roswell for this. Instead, I wish to share a great little southwestern town with you. Roswell, New Mexico has a population of over 40,000. This is a great deal larger than my hometown of Marble Falls, but it still has the same small town atmosphere. Everything is very quaint. Will Rogers had said that Roswell was the prettiest little town in the West. Otto had taught many years of New Mexico history, and when the subject of Billy the Kid and the Lincoln County War came up, he had much to share, and he lent me a book to read on the subject. This is an excerpt from the autobiography of James M. Miller. He was an early settler in New Mexico. He began a sheep ranch on the Chisholm Cattle Range. This is an account of his personal meetings with Billy the Kid. Although I admitted at the beginning, my account of the Lincoln County War is generally secondhand, but from those on the ground at the time, I am able to end the chapter with something about Billy the Kid, whom I happened to meet in entire peaceableness twice during the short space of time I remained in New Mexico. It was only a few days after the assassination of Sheriff Brady in Lincoln. By a shot from Billy Matthews, Billy the Kid received a slight wound in the groin and had come down with a few of his associates to rest up for a while in a sort of cave they used in the bluffs east of the Pecos River. Naturally, they came up to the Chisholm Commissary for supplies every few days, and it was there I saw Billy the Kid for the first time. When I entered the store that day, the kid was sitting on the counter, and as I got within earshot, I heard him say something about the Bottomless Lakes. As a natural curiosity, not far from the cave in which Billy and his pals were hiding. As I was a newcomer and did not know about the lakes, I asked, why were they called bottomless? Billy answered pleasantly enough and explained that not long before, at a big roundup, he and some of the other boys had tied together all their picket ropes and had tried to find out the depth of 2 of them without being able to reach the bottom. Then he added, and I remember his very words, "There is fish in them lakes as black as my hat," pointing to the broad brim felt he was wearing. That was an innocent enough topic to converge upon with a young fellow, then building up his reputation as a desperado. But the incident seems fully characteristic of Billy. It showed him to be, after all, simply a God-fearing, good-hearted boy, very observant and intelligent for his age. It also displayed certain attractive qualities, especially friendliness and affability, that lingers pleasantly in the minds of those who came into acquaintance with him, and make them lenient in judging him and his deeds, and incline them to overlook rash crimes. Escapades would perhaps be the better term for judging him. The general conditions of the county might be taken into consideration. I still think that had he been given the chance, it might have been altogether different for him. Otto, ever the educator, introduced me to one of the finest museums Roswell has to offer. It was here that I found one of my heroes in the scientific community, Dr. Robert H. Goddard. Dr. Goddard is the father of the space age. He was making rockets in the 1920s. In 1909, back east, Goddard realized his dream for hopes that we could travel to the moon and to Mars with rockets. Though in his speculation about space travel and using rockets, he was greatly ridiculed by the media. From then on, he kept his work to himself, but pressed on and never quit on his dream. On March 16, 1926, Dr. Goddard's first rocket flight took to the air and sustained flight for a lofty 3 seconds. It was the beginning of many trial and error attempts at rocketry. Though this was a new science, Dr. Goddard pioneered much of it. By 1929, Goddard's rockets had made leaps and bounds from that very first one. However, one day a mishap started a fire since he used liquid fuel. Dr. Goddard thought it would probably be wise to move his work to a less populated area. So in 1930, he and his wife moved to Roswell, New Mexico to continue his work. By this time, he had a rocket that was 11 feet in length and weighed 55 pounds empty. This rocket achieved 2,000 feet of altitude and a speed of 500 miles per hour. All the while, he was studying the debris from his missiles and improving upon their design. He soon found that adding a parachute to his rockets would return them gently back to the Earth, thus enabling him to place measuring devices in the nose cone. Every rocket was more advanced than the one preceding it. He designed mechanisms for guidance and control while in flight, measured temperature, barometric pressure, and many other things from his rockets. Yet the military and most men of science in his day saw no practicality in his work. Yet when they realized that the Germans were also working on rocket technology, they fully grasped the seriousness of his work. I had always been told that most of our early advancements at the beginning of the space age concerning rockets had come from German technology. Well, during World War II, when one of the captured German scientists was being questioned about their rockets, he merely responded, "Why are you asking me? You should be asking your own Dr. Robert Goddard, for it is from him that we copied our ideas." Dr. Goddard died in 1945, never seeing the entire course of his ingenious work, though its ramifications have touched the world over. Otto continued playing tour guide and was a fine ambassador for the city of Roswell as we went out to the Bitter Lakes National Wildlife Refuge, 24,500 acres near the Pecos River, where the Chihuahuan Desert meets the Great Plains. Much of this area is made up of wetlands and small, shallow, spring-fed lakes. A great deal of waterfowl winter there. And then we went to see the Bottomless Lakes. These are sinkholes filled with water year-round, and one of them measuring 90 feet deep. I spent 2 nights in Roswell with Otto and Dorothy, and they took me out to a nice restaurant with their adult children and their families for my last night there. I felt like I had stepped into the modern era after weeks in the wilderness and the Old West. It was the first time since the World Series in Prescott, Arizona, that I remember watching any TV. I saw my first ever episode of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? And I was also saddened to hear the news about the Texas A&M bonfire tragedy, where 12 students perished and 27 others were injured. It was also at this time that I started to make a few observations. From spending extended stays in the wilderness, riding in cars now is such a trip. It's such an adjustment from walking. You feel like you're going at warp speed, or maybe ludicrous speed from the movie Spaceballs. The detergent and the soap aisles in the supermarket are overwhelming with the number of perfumes. I can smell them 2 or 3 aisles away, and I avoid them unless absolutely necessary. The tabloid covers and magazine ads at the checkout are so busy and annoying. The same for TV commercials. It feels like sensory overload, which is crazy how numb we usually are to all of this. I was so thankful that our paths had crossed and for the hospitality and the insightful tour of Roswell that the Ekus family had given me. Day 62. Date, November 20th, 1999. Sunrise, 6:32 a.m. Sunset, 4:54 p.m. Moon phase, waxing gibbous. Elevation, 3,300 feet. Location, Artesia, New Mexico. It was about dark when I made my way through town. I came across a K-Bob steakhouse. Seeing how I had been craving a good steak for some time and not having one since Quartzsite, Arizona, I decided this would be the place to dine. I proceeded inside and had a seat and ordered my meal. Little did I know that I would meet my soon-to-be host in this town. As I was eating, the owner came and had a seat with me. This was after he had gotten some information about me from the waitress who had been serving me. Anyway, he sat down and began to size me up, see what I was all about. Of course, everybody was just a little bit curious as to who I was and why on earth I was carrying this giant pack on my back, and I was in here of all places eating a steak. So we sat there and had a marvelous conversation. He admitted that at first when he saw me come up, he thought I was coming to panhandle the customers. Though he quickly changed his mind after having sat down and talked with me, and seeing the state of my dress and equipment. I paid for my dinner, and he bought my apple cobbler, a la mode. Of course, I had a captive audience when it was time for me to leave. Everyone watched intently as I hoisted my pack over my head onto my back in one swift move. I had a bit of experience perfecting this move, where I got a round of applause from the entire steakhouse. Brian Morton, the owner, asked me to give him a call in the morning for breakfast. It turns out that his sister Dana ran the Chaos Cafe next door. I met him for breakfast, then he took me to church. We had a great service and a time of worship. It was here that I met Patty Dawsey. She was interested in interviewing me. She needed to interview someone for her speech class at the New Mexico State University in Carlsbad, and she thought I would be the perfect person. We set a time for later in the day. Patty was so impressed that she talked to her son's third grade teacher and set up a time for me to come and speak to the class the next day. I had a blast talking with all the students and sharing my adventures, and I kept them entertained for over an hour. Then, on my way south again. Though before leaving, I had my first bout of real misfortune the whole trip. I misplaced my Bible. It was really important to me. I had had this Bible all through boot camp and everywhere I had went in the Marine Corps. I had underlined and marked many passages that were important to me after years of study. I know we aren't to live on bread alone, but this loss, it also hit me like a gut punch. All of my free Subway sandwich cards were kept safely inside. Well over 200 feet of free sandwiches. I'd used many of them, but most of the time thus far on this trip I had been in the deserts or the mountains, far away from subways. I was thankful that I had taken my birth certificate out just a couple of weeks before and placed it with my laptop. This probably wouldn't have happened had I not still had my camouflage book cover on my Bible that I got while I was in the service. I had set everything on the ground in the grass waiting for Patty to pick me up and take me to her son's school. I usually kept my Bible inside my pack, but I had been reading it that morning with breakfast at the cafe, and I was just carrying it in my free hand. So when Patty pulled up in the car, I grabbed everything except what I did not see as it blended in with the grass, only to find out later that I had left it. We went back after lunch, but it was to no avail. Hopefully, someone else was fed both physically and spiritually when they found it. I pressed onward because I had a special Thanksgiving meal to get to in Carlsbad. My parents, on a last-minute whim, decided to drive the 8 hours out to see me for the Thanksgiving holiday. What a surprise! And the stew my mother made, I can still remember the taste of that meal today. We camped at Bottomless Lakes State Park, just north of Carlsbad, on the Pecos River. We were the guests of honor to the nobility who lived in the park. And you might ask yourselves, what royals do we have residing in New Mexico? Well, think about the raccoons from the movie The Great Outdoors. Only this time, substitute raccoons for skunks. Lots of them, who had no qualms about letting themselves into your tents at night, rummaging through your belongings, and basically holding court to a very captive audience. Did you know that a group of skunks is called a surfeit? Surfeit is a synonym for gorging oneself. It implies a nauseating repletion. During my parents' visit, accompanied by my youngest brother Brian, we toured the Carlsbad Caverns and the Sitting Bull Falls. Located in the Guadalupe Mountains National Park, both of these attractions are awesome. First, the caverns. Never have I been in a cave where I spent the majority of the time looking up. Not only was the cave monstrous, but there were spectacular formations all throughout. At 750 feet below the surface, the big room is the size of 14 football fields. The really interesting thing that my brother, a 5th grader at the time, found unbelievable was that even when we reached the very bottom of this cave, we would still be a couple of thousand feet higher in elevation than our home back in Marble Falls. Another fascinating formation, or lack thereof, drip holes. There were large deposits of gypsum inside the big room. The acidic water would drip down and it would dissolve away the rock, leaving a perfect hole. Instead of a formation being built by many years of particles being deposited, the formation was shaped by many years of the gypsum being dissolved. We also hiked to and enjoyed the spring-fed Sitting Bull Falls in the Lincoln National Forest. The water flows through a series of streams and pools until reaching the falls, plummeting 150 feet into the canyon below, and then returning underground. All in all, it had been a terrific Thanksgiving surprise. I was so glad my family had come to see me, and I was sad to see them leave. But I knew within a month's time, I would be home. The next time on the Long Journey podcast. The morning started out like so many of late. Cold and frozen before the sun comes up, and then t-shirt and shorts by 10 a.m. Yet, off in the distance, just after lunch, the skies had darkened to the northwest. The dark tendrils stretching up from the horizon, slowly growing and strangling the bright blue skies. But these weren't rain clouds. It was a West Texas dust storm. These are manageable if you have shelter. A whole lot less agreeable if you don't. I hiked the rest of the day with a bit more urgency, wondering where I would bed down that night. Finally, it was upon me, the winds howling and the dust and sand blasting me from all sides. I was still out in the open, miles from anywhere, my face clad in a bandana to help me breathe. I found the only place for shelter that I could, and I dove in. You can find more details about the Long Journey podcast at journeylong.com. And be sure to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on your platform of choice. Thank you, and may you journey long.